She was a queen so rich that her wealth was known across the ancient world. She was a general so fierce that the mightiest African empire, Egypt, eventually found itself ruled by her dynasty. And yet this powerful African woman, the true ruler of a vast gold-filled land, has been almost entirely forgotten by history. This is the story of the Kandake, the true queen of the Kingdom of Kush. You might know about Cleopatra of Egypt, but the African Queens of Kush were often richer, more powerful, and ruled for centuries, even controlling the very thrones of the pharaohs. This forgotten superpower ruled an immense territory along the Nile River, in the land we now call Sudan. This entire civilization stood right next to Egypt for thousands of years, trading with them, fighting them, and even, at one point, conquering and ruling them. The Kingdom of Kush was one of the greatest civilizations that ever existed. Yet somehow, it faded from the world's memory. It's time to uncover the secrets of the Kandakes and ask, why is the story of the richest queen in Africa a secret the history books barely tell? To understand her power, you must first understand her home. The Kingdom of Kush was an empire built on gold. The ancient traders who dealt with this region often called it Ethiopia, a word that simply meant the land of burnt faces because of the darker skin of its people. This African empire was known everywhere for its immense riches. Kush sat in a perfect spot. It was the gateway for all the resources flowing from the heart of Africa, north toward the Mediterranean. Think of everything precious: gold, iron, ivory, leopard skins, ebony wood, and rare spices. Everything flowed through Kush. The kings, and most importantly, the queens of this land, controlled the flow of wealth, making their capital city, Meroë, a center of power and luxury, unmatched anywhere in Africa. When a queen of Kush wanted to show her power, she didn't just build a palace, she buried herself in a pyramid. If you travel to Sudan today, you can see these unique Kushite pyramids. They are smaller and steeper than the massive pyramids of Egypt, but there are far more of them, hundreds of pyramids standing proudly in the hot desert sand. These pyramids are a quiet, powerful symbol of Kushite royalty, telling the world that this kingdom was just as proud, just as rich, and just as permanent as its famous neighbor, Egypt. The Kushite civilization began over 4,000 years ago, tied deeply to the fate of Egypt. But the most exciting time came when they asserted their own unique power, eventually rising up to do the unthinkable. They launched a full-scale invasion of their mighty northern neighbor. This dramatic act of defiance changed African history forever. The amazing success of Kush was built entirely on the deep dynastic connection between their kingdom and the very thrones of Egypt. For thousands of years, the two great nations along the Nile were locked in a strange relationship. Sometimes they were rivals, sometimes they were partners, and sometimes one was ruled by the other. For a long time, it was Egypt that ruled Kush. The mighty Egyptian pharaohs, with their grand armies and giant stone temples, looked south to Kush only as a source of wealth. They built forts to control the flow of gold and ivory, and tried to make Kushite people forget their own ways and become more like Egyptians. But history is always moving. Around 750 BC, Egypt had become weak. It was broken into small pieces ruled by different leaders who spent more time fighting each other than protecting their country. This weakness was a chance for Kush. The southern kings, the rulers of Kush, had been carefully watching and waiting. They saw themselves as the true heirs to the powerful old Egyptian ways, believing that the northern Egyptian rulers had forgotten how to properly worship the gods. A powerful Kushite king named Paye decided it was time to act. He believed it was his sacred duty to restore order to Egypt. He led his army north, not as an invader to destroy, but as a ruler coming home to clean up a mess. King Piye's conquest of Egypt was a dramatic military victory. He sailed his great fleet down the Nile, winning battle after battle. He showed immense respect for the Egyptian gods, even stopping his army to participate in important religious festivals. This made many Egyptians welcome him. Piye eventually defeated all the local kings and warlords. He marched into the grand capital city of Memphis and took the throne, not just of Kush, but of all Egypt. This single event created one of the most exciting periods in African history, the time of the Black Pharaohs. For over a century, the kings of Kush ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty. They were Kushite kings, but they wore the double crown of Egypt, symbolizing rule over both lands. They brought back the power and unity that Egypt had lost. These Black Pharaohs built new temples in Egypt, restored old religious sites, and most famously, built their own unique pyramids in their home country of Kush, showing they were just as powerful as the original pharaohs. This conquest was vital to the Queen's story because it showed Kush's power to the world. It showed that Kush was not just a supplier of gold, but a center of political power, military might, and dynastic heritage. However, ruling Egypt was a heavy burden. Piye and his family eventually ran into a problem far greater than the squabbling local lords: the Assyrian Empire from the Middle East. The Assyrians were brutal warriors who had mastered the art of war with iron weapons. The Kushite pharaohs, despite their strength, could not stand up to the Assyrians' constant invasions and superior iron technology. After fierce fighting, the Kushite kings were forced to retreat back south, leaving the throne of Egypt behind. This retreat did not end their kingdom. It was actually the beginning of Kush's greatest and most unique era. The kings returned to their southern heartland, but they took with them the immense cultural knowledge and wealth they had gained from ruling Egypt. They settled their capital city further south in a place called Meroë. By moving their center of power, the Kushites started to become truly independent. They began to forget the Egyptian language and instead developed their own new writing system and their own unique gods. The new city of Meroë was about to become the center of a mighty African kingdom that was no longer just a copy of Egypt, but a power in its own right, a power defined by its endless wealth and soon by its powerful queens. When the kings of Kush moved their capital to Meroë, they were making a very smart decision based on two precious resources: gold and iron. The land around Meroë was incredibly rich in gold deposits. The Kushite people were masters at mining, pulling huge amounts of gold from the earth. This gold was the lifeblood of their economy. It was the material that paid for their armies, their temples, and their unique pyramids. The vast supply of gold in Kush was famous, and it allowed them to maintain their wealth even as their influence over Egypt faded. The rest of the world knew that if you wanted African gold, you had to deal with the kings and queens of Meroë. But gold was not the only secret to their success. Kush was also rich in iron ore, the heavy stone used to make metal. While the rest of the world was struggling with weaker bronze tools, the Kushites became one of the first major civilizations in Africa to master iron smelting. This meant they could make stronger tools for farming, and most importantly, stronger weapons for their soldiers. Meroë became known for its huge piles of iron slag, the waste left over from smelting. So big they looked like small hills. These slag heaps prove that Meroë was a true industrial city, the heart of an African Iron Age power. The ability to control the supply of gold for trade and iron for war made Meroë an unstoppable force for centuries. With their wealth secure, the Kushite people of Meroë began to develop a truly unique culture, distinct from the Egyptian culture they had borrowed so much from. Their art and religion changed. While they still worshipped some Egyptian gods, they elevated their own powerful gods. The most important was Apedemak, the lion god. Apedemak was a fierce warrior god who protected the kingdom and the king. You can see Apedemak on many temple walls, always ready for battle, showing that the Meroitic religion was deeply tied to the idea of military power and African kingship. They also stopped relying on the complex Egyptian writing system. The Kushite scholars in Meroë created their own new, beautiful script called Meroitic. This script was used to write their own language and carve their unique history onto the walls of their temples and the stones of their tombs. This creation was a proud step, marking Meroë as a place of genuine African innovation and learning, no longer just the southern cousin of Egypt. And then there were the pyramids. When the Kushite kings buried their rulers in the desert near Meroë, they built pyramids, but they built them differently. Instead of the massive triangle-shaped Egyptian tombs, the Meroitic pyramids were tall, slender, and much steeper. These hundreds of pyramids form a stunning royal cemetery. They show that while the Meroitic kings respected the traditions of the Nile, they always made it their own, stamping their unique style on everything they did. The city of Meroë, rich from its gold trade and protected by its iron weapons, was the center of a mighty African power. And it was here, in this powerful, uniquely African environment, that the greatest royal leaders arose. In Meroë, power was not just held by men. The Kushite royal family had a unique and powerful tradition. The Queen Mother, known by the title Kandake, held immense authority. The title was so important that the Kandake often had more real power than the ruling king. She could decide which prince would inherit the throne, lead armies in battle, and even choose when a king's reign must end. This was not a system where women were simply wives or background figures. It was a society where women were expected to be fierce political leaders, military strategists, and spiritual rulers all at once. The Kandakes were the ultimate symbol of Kushite independence and power. This history focuses on the greatest of these queens, Kandake Amanirenas. She ruled around the year 25 BC, a time when the world was changing fast. Amanirenas was a formidable woman. Her name, like her title, was a statement of power. We know from historical records that she led her troops into battle herself. She was often pictured wearing massive, elaborate armor, carrying a spear and a shield, and she was known to be a brilliant, aggressive military planner. Legend tells us that she suffered a terrible injury in battle, losing an eye, which only seemed to make her more determined and more terrifying to her enemies. She was a general, a politician, a queen, and a high priestess. She was the absolute power in the land of gold. Amanirenas faced a problem far bigger than any local rival. While Kush had been focusing on developing Meroë, a gigantic, hungry, and new superpower had crept south down the Nile and swallowed Kush's old rival, Egypt. This new threat was the rising power of the Romans. The Romans, based in Italy, had conquered most of the Mediterranean world. When their armies took over Egypt, they immediately saw Kush as a source of two things they desperately wanted: gold and slaves. The Roman leaders saw themselves as the rightful masters of the world, and they saw the wealthy African Kingdom of Kush as merely another piece of land to be controlled and taxed. The Romans sent their tax collectors and soldiers to establish a strong presence right on Kush's northern border. They made demands for tribute and taxes, treating the Kandake and her kingdom like a small, weak territory they could bully. This was an immediate and deadly challenge to Queen Amanirenas. She had inherited a kingdom that had defied the pharaohs and stood proud for centuries. She had no intention of bowing to these newcomers from across the sea, no matter how famous their armies were. She knew that if she paid the first Roman tax, they would simply demand more until Kush was no longer a free kingdom. Queen Amanirenas had made a brave and shocking decision. She would not wait for the Romans to attack. She would strike first. The mighty Kingdom of Kush, led by its ferocious one-eyed queen, prepared for war against the entire Roman Empire. Gathering her Meroitic armies, soldiers armed with Kush's own powerful iron weapons, riding war elephants, and known for their fierce skill with the bow and arrow, Amanirenas began her daring invasion of Roman-controlled Egypt. The Roman army stationed there was caught completely by surprise. The Romans believed the Queen of Kush was a simple African ruler who would surely bow down to them. They were wrong. The Kushite army, led by the Kandake herself, smashed into the Roman positions. They overwhelmed the garrisons and sent the surviving Roman soldiers running north in fear. This was an astonishing defeat for the Roman Empire, which was used to conquering everyone they met. The African queen had proven her fury was a force to be reckoned with. But Amanirenas' true aim was not just military victory. It was a political statement. After driving the Romans out of Syene, the queen's forces marched on, taking key Roman forts and capturing many prisoners. To show the Romans that the African Kingdom of Kush was powerful and independent, the queen ordered a powerful symbolic act. In Syene, there was a statue of the Roman Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the world. Queen Amanirenas' troops tore down the huge statue. They cut off its head and carried it back south to Meroë as a trophy. This act was a sign of defiance that echoed across the ancient world. No Roman ruler, not even the emperor, would stand over the people of Kush. The queen was in charge. The captured bronze head of Augustus became Meroë's most famous war trophy. The Kandake had the head buried, not in a museum, but underneath the steps of a temple dedicated to the Kushite war god, Apetimak. Every time a citizen or ruler walked up to the temple, they were symbolically walking over the defeated head of the Roman emperor. It was a perfect, silent piece of political theater, a testament to the queen's successful invasion. But the Romans would not let such a massive insult stand. News of the defeat and the destruction of the emperor's statue reached Rome, and the Emperor Augustus was furious. He immediately ordered a massive counterattack. The Romans prepared a huge army led by one of their greatest generals, Petronius, to march south and destroy the Kingdom of Kush entirely. This Roman counterattack was terrifying. Petronius brought thousands of highly trained, heavily armed Roman legionaries. They marched with incredible speed, determined to teach the African queen a lesson in humility. The Romans easily recaptured their lost territory. They pursued the Kushite army all the way back to the capital, Meroë, showing no mercy. They conquered every major city and fort in their path. These queen's forces fought bravely, but the sheer size and relentless pressure of the Roman army were overwhelming. The climax of the war came with the capture of the city of Napata, which was still an incredibly important religious city for Kush. Even though Meroë was the political capital, the Romans sacked Napata, tearing down the beautiful temples and destroying much of the city's wealth. Queen Amanirenas was facing the complete ruin of her kingdom. Her brazen attack had succeeded in proving Kush's courage, but it had failed to stop the Roman war machine. It looked certain that the richest queen in Africa would be defeated, captured, and taken back to Rome in chains. But the Kandake was far too clever and too powerful to let her history end in defeat. The Roman general Petronius had taken Napata, but his victory was not complete. He faced a huge problem. He was very far from Egypt. His supply lines were long and stretched through the harsh desert, making it difficult to keep his army fed and supplied. He knew that the Kushite queen, though defeated in battle, was still in command of her home territory and would keep fighting using swift, brutal guerrilla tactics. Queen Amanirenas, the one-eyed general, saw this weakness clearly. She sent messengers to the Roman general, not to surrender, but to negotiate. She used her position, deep within her own territory and controlling the remaining resources, as leverage. The Roman general, tired of fighting a long, costly war far from Rome, decided to listen. This negotiation led to one of the most remarkable victories in African history. In 21 BC, Queen Amanirenas and the Roman Empire signed a peace treaty. This was not a surrender agreement. It was a pact between two equals. The Romans agreed to pull their troops entirely out of Kushite land. Even more incredibly, the treaty officially recognized Kush's borders and freed Kush from ever having to pay any tribute or taxes to Rome. Amanirenas lost battles, but she won the war for independence. The Roman Empire rarely, if ever, signed a non-aggression treaty with a queen, much less an African kingdom it had just invaded. This peace treaty secured the Kingdom of Kush's freedom for nearly 300 years. While Rome crumbled and fell across Europe, the Kandates of Kush continued to rule their golden empire, proudly independent. The broken bronze head of Emperor Augustus remained buried beneath the temple steps, a silent, powerful reminder that Kush stood free because of the queen's defiance. The richest queen in Africa had protected her wealth and her crown. The kingdom was now able to enter its final great phase of culture. The wealth from the gold mines flowed, and the trade flourished along new routes away from Roman control. The people built new temples, and the queens continued to rule with the immense power granted by their unique laws. The victory of Queen Amanirenas was a victory for African sovereignty that lasted for centuries. But even this defiant kingdom could not last forever. Its end would come not from another military invader like Rome, but from a quiet, internal failure. The peace treaty signed by Queen Amanirenas secured Kush's independence, but it could not stop the long, slow, grinding changes happening to the world around Meroë. The empire's end would come not with a bang, but with a whisper of loss. The problems that led to the final decline were mainly economic and environmental. First, the gold that had given the Kandakes their immense wealth started to run out. Mining is hard work, and over centuries, the most easily reached gold deposits were exhausted. Without the constant flow of gold, the royal treasury began to shrink. The queens could no longer fund the massive trade missions or the large armies needed to protect their vast land. Second, the trade routes shifted again. Just like Axum centuries later, Kush found that new desert routes and different sea trade patterns began to bypass the Nile completely. Less trade meant less money, leading to a quieter, more isolated kingdom. New trading rivals, like the rising kingdom of Axum further south, began to take over the crucial African trade networks. Third, the environment suffered. To smelt all the iron that made their weapons strong, the people of Meroë had to cut down vast forests to fuel their huge furnaces. Cutting down all those trees led to the same problem Axum faced: soil erosion. The land dried out, farming became difficult, and the desert started to creep in toward the once thriving capital. These slow problems were the true cause of the empire's final collapse. Axum, the growing power to the south, eventually invaded Kush around 350 AD. But the invasion only delivered the final blow to an empire that was already weak, poor, and struggling to feed itself. The great Kingdom of Kush, the home of the Black Pharaohs and the defiant Kandakes, faded from political view, leaving behind only the evidence of its magnificent power. But even in its ruin, the legacy of the richest queen was not truly lost. The vast Kushite pyramids still stand in the desert, silent but permanent monuments to their rulers, reminding the world that Africa was once home to one of the most enduring civilizations on Earth. The beautiful carvings that survived show us the Kandakes, women like Amanirenas, in full battle gear, with massive crowns, leading their armies and holding the weapons of war. These images are a powerful reminder of a time when female power was the true foundation of a mighty empire. So why is the richest queen in Africa a secret history barely told? It is because Kush was isolated. When the empire fell, its powerful story was surrounded by silence, overshadowed by the more heavily recorded histories of Rome and Egypt. But the silence is now breaking. Today, the pyramids of Meroë and the defiant story of the Kandake stand as proof of a brilliant, rich, and fiercely independent African dynasty that lasted for thousands of years. The Queen of Kush fought the world's greatest empire and won independence, and her incredible tale demands to be heard.